Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for week 9 of the Rugby Research and Intervention Group 2025 Analytics Series. Our first return is Marianas from the University of Buffalo. Marianas will be presenting on degrees of freedom and effect sizes. Marianas, may you please share your screen?
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Maria Moquete, and I'm going to be presenting degrees of freedom and effect size. Today, I'm going to talk about two key concepts in the statistics that are often overlooked: effect size and degrees of freedom. We often rely too heavily on p-value to tell us whether something is statistically significant, but significance alone doesn't always mean something is meaningful or reliable. That's where today's topic comes in. We'll define each concept, go through our examples and formulas, and most importantly, explore how they help us better interpret data, whether by doing research, analyzing experiments, or just becoming more informed on this topic. What is effect size? Effect size is a way to measure the magnitude of a result, not just whether it happens, but how big or meaningful the result is. Most importantly, it helps researchers compare results across multiple platforms. Let's compare it to p-value. A p-value tells you whether your result is likely due to chance. In other words, if it's statistically significant, but it doesn't tell you how important or impactful the result really is. That's where the gap effect size fills in. It tells us the difference or relationship in our data and what really matters in our real world data. This is especially useful when comparing results across multiple studies or groups, or even in results that show statistical significance. Their effect size may differ, and that tells us more than p-value. Now, interpreting effect size. Effect size is not just numbers, it's a way to understand how meaningful a result truly is. When comparing two groups, we often use a metric called Cohen's d, which is right here. It's which quantifies the difference between groups, means, and standardized units. It's separated into three units, like small, medium, and large. Small being 0.2, medium is around 0.5, and a large effect would be 0.8 or higher. For relationship between variables, we use a correlation coefficient, typically denoted as little r, which is indicated by 0.1, which is a small correlation within data, 0.3, which is a medium correlation, and 0.5, which is a larger correlation. But it's important to understand that these thresholds aren't fixed and that the context matters in these examples. For example, even in medicine, when we have a small effect size, it could represent life-changing medical use or medical effects. What are degrees of freedom? Degrees of freedom, also known as DF, represents a number of values in the statistical calculations that are free to vary while meaning a certain constraint. In practice, this helps us quantify how much independent information is provided for an estimate parameter. The most common formula that is used with degrees of freedom is df equals little n minus 1, n being the number of observations in your sample. Degrees of freedom are the foundation in many statistical procedures, including t-test, chi-square, ANOVA, and regression analysis, because they influence how we calculate or test statistics. What makes DF so important is its impact on reliability. Large degrees of freedom usually lead to a more precise estimate and greater statistical power. Smaller degrees of freedom often gives greater uncertainty within the information and reduces the ability to detect real-life effects. Understanding degrees of freedom allows us to interpret our statistical results with the right level of confidence. Effect size versus degrees of freedom. Now let's bring both concepts together. Effect size is how big or meaningful an effect is, and degrees of freedom shows us how much or dependent information we're working with to estimate the effects. Both are critical in interpreting statistical results accurately, but the key difference between the two is that larger degrees of freedom helps you make a greater estimate and your statement could be more stable and trustworthy. Where degrees of freedom is low, your estimate is more uncertain, and your power to detect real life effects it goes down. So while they measure different things, they work together to give a complete picture. Now, real life applications of both can be seen when we have when now that we have that have shown you degrees of freedom and effect size. Effect size and degrees of freedom can be used in real life examples, such as in research, which we rely deeply in degrees of freedom when we're trying to use reliable and precise information for statistical estimates, ensuring that our findings are reliable and not just due by random chance and not by random variables. And effect size, on the other hand, gives us or guides us to make decisions that helps us answer questions like, is this treatment more effective than the other, and helps us make more conclusive statements. Together, this concept helps us make informed evidence-based decisions that actually hold up in practice and not just in theory. To conclude, effect size shows us the magnitude of a result and how big or meaningful it is, while degrees of freedom reflect how independent information we're working with. Both of these ideas go beyond the limitations of p-value, giving us a deeper understanding of how reliable and impactful our results really are. When analyzing, always consider effect size and degrees of freedom and p-value on the side as well. When analyzing data together, they give us a fuller picture and more accurate interpretation. Here are my references, and thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mariana, for that presentation. Are there any questions?
I don't have a question, but I would like to comment that that was an amazing presentation. Yes, I agree. Degrees of freedom and effect sizes, they definitely get overlooked in statistics, and it's very important that we know what they're about. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Nadir. So, if there are not any more, we can move on. Our second intern is Asha from Columbia University. Asha will be presenting on data cleaning and validation techniques. Asha, may you please share your screen?
Thank you so much for that introduction, William. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Asha, and I'll be going over data cleaning and validation. So what is data cleaning? Essentially, it's a process of identifying and fixing problems to allow a data set to be complete, organized, and accurate. So for example, I took a screenshot of what a bad data set looks like. For example, these 6 names all refer to the same person, but they're all nicknames in different variations. So for example, instead of having these 7 different entries, which may look like 7 different people, but they're actually one person, we could I guess, use date of birth to kind of clean this data set up and kind of associate all 7 with one person. And this is just a small example of how this one data set can be cleaned to account for one person as opposed to, I guess, like 6 or 7 different names for the same person. And this is just more examples of bad data or very unorganized or unclean data. As you can see here with the name, like John Smith, J. Smith, abbreviations, punctuation marks, they all correlate to data not being inputted in the same format. Same thing goes for phone numbers and email addresses. Sometimes they're non-printable characters, which make it very difficult to sometimes analyze the specific email address you want to reach someone out to, or rather the phone number. And the same thing goes for address. Case sensitivity is very important for trying to make a data set look clean and complete. For example, Sycamore Street, it is best to really follow, for example, this format, the second row, in which number, boulevard, state, essentially keeping it very holistic and homogeneous. And this is a good graphic I found of the different data cleaning steps. I'll go over each individual step later on, but just as a holistic overview, importing the data can come from many different sources. I know for our purposes, we analyze data sets individually depending on where we go and what tournaments we receive. And so each one of us has our own little Excel sheet that we import the data from. And then we have to merge those together, given with all the variables and everything that we input, we need to put that into our larger data set. And then we need to rebuild missing data. That will be our 999s, not applicable, essentially making it in a way in which we can easily pull variables and data points without missing data being a hindrance. Then there's standardization, normalization. I'll go over these 2 more in depth later on. Deduplication essentially is taking out all the accidental double entries. And then these last 2 are more of verification, going over the process again. and then exporting that final most updated data set. And it's key to know that this is not just a one-time process. This is a multi-step process. So while in the past you would have your final clean data set, we're always going to have more data coming in. And so data cleaning is always going to be a continuous process, especially for research. So the first two steps are importing and merging data. And this is essentially, like I said, combining data points from different sources and comes from different data pipelines. But in our case, we would use Microsoft Excel files. And any other different formats like Google Sheets may require reformatting and downloading, so it's best to stay with this original format. And additionally, we must be able to merge data points from these sources into one coherent database. And so this part alone could take some time, as sometimes columns may not fully line up depending on which version of the Excel sheet you get, and then other anomalies like that. Now, the next part is rebuilding and standardization, which I mentioned that missing data values like 999s can often hamper on data set completion. And standardization is just another way of saying how data should be inputted. So, for example, case sensitivity, how phone numbers are written, how dates are expressed. And so I just took a screenshot here. This is a fake data set, but this is really what an ideal and clean data set looks like. Notice how for gender, female and male are all listed the same way. There's no like F for M or lowercase f for female. It all looks very homogeneous and it is typed in the same case. Essentially, very homogeneous and helps us analyze it better, and it also looks cleaner as well. Also, how dates are expressed is very important. Instead of saying 04/8, if you can see that over there, it just says 4/8. Um, while for us, dates aren't as important, it still helps it look very homogeneous, neat, and it's just an easy way to go through dates very quickly. Also, how phone numbers are written. Um, these are fake employee IDs. Having these follow a standard system is very useful when we're trying to organize. For example, in this data set, if there's an ID given for which department that person falls under, having a set identification system helps us pull specific events from our data set very quickly. And then standardization can often be implemented into an Excel sheet by enforcing parameters via data validation, which I will go over in the next few slides. Now, normalization. These are some do's and don'ts. In simple terms, normalization uses the existing data and analyzing it to make it comparable. And this usually is done by making simple tables. Now, when you analyze the appropriate variables, it could be very useful in scaling the data. It can help lead to very helpful predictions. For example, if I wanted to if I wanted to make a table that compares the department and the average ages of the people that work in the department, that could be a very useful comparison. However, some cons include over normalization, in which you just take random columns and then make tables out of them with random variables, and sometimes it's not as useful. So, for example, um, if I correlate, let's just say the job title with the hiring date, that may not be as useful because you may end up making more unnecessary tables, which make your data clunky and difficult to understand. And now we go into data validation, which is the process of controlling how data is formatted once entered into an Excel sheet. This is very, very useful for reducing transcription bias and helps in standardization, which remember is the way that we input data. And examples of data validation in Excel include lists, restricting cells to only accept decimal or whole number values, depending what you would like, choosing what date format should be used, and how time should be expressed. And so this is the steps of me creating a list, but there are also different steps in creating dates as well. So I'll quickly go over just a quick Excel that I made later on and what options you could do. But for making a list. So first create what list options you would like within a separate sheet. So on sheet one, I want to find out the gender, but also what pet preference the person has. And then on sheet two, I list it out. So male, female for gender, and then these animals for the pet preference. Then step two is to go to data underneath for Excel. and then go to this button and press the drop down and then select data validation. Then afterwards, you go to the allow section, and then in my case, I chose a list, and then select the cells where your options have been previously listed. So then where it says source, you would just go to the second sheet, select these cells, and then you would press OK. And then from there, I'll show this later very quickly within the Excel that I made. It will create a drop down and you'll be able to populate it in your column and you can select data from there. But a few key takeaways. Data cleaning is very important for the organization of a data set, and it's often a multi-step process. It allows us to effectively analyze and make predictions. And then data validation in Excel is a very useful tool to help standardize inputting through lists, numbers, and data formats. And in short, clean data leads to trust, accuracy, and efficiency. These are my references. And before I take any questions, I'm just going to quickly show you all this mock Excel that I made just to quickly go over, I guess, how to do it. I think a one-on-one is more important than screenshots, at least in this case. So for date here, see I'm under the data tab, and then I go under this drop-down menu, data validation. I select data validation. Um, if you see here, this is what I previously made. I also made a date parameter. So this, if you wanted to make a survey, for example, um, or if you have any set or start dates that you need to be within, let's just say that my start date is today, the 31st, and it ends August 7th. And this error message essentially says whenever there's a date that is below the 31st or above the 8th, it will be an error. And what I mean by that, say I try typing August 19th, 2025. I will get a data alert, meaning that it does not match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. And then I will not be able to input that date. But if I put August 1st, 2025, that is an acceptable date. Same thing with pet preference. See how I made a drop-down menu? I could quickly go over one for gender. Just quickly go to data validation, settings. I'm going to select list. My source is going to be in sheet 2, where I have male, female. I go back, I press OK. And then now that there is a drop down here, I can take the arrow, extend this drop down through a bunch of cells, and then now I get the drop down menu option for the rest of these cells. And you'll see here when you input data yourself, you'll see that there are a bunch of drop down menus. And if you look at the bottom with where the sheets are, you will also find that I've inputted those variables as well. So as you're making your own personal Excel sheets, and also inputting, now you get a sense of where these parameters come from and how you can also use it as well. But that was just a little tutorial. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Ash, for the tutorial and the presentation. It was really helpful. So are there any questions?
I wanted to say that was a really good presentation, and I love like the examples and how you put like hands on showing how to do it. It was really good.
Thank you.
Okay, then
Yeah,
if
just
not,
to add on, just to add into what Mariana's comment, I think that it's really important to stress like the importance of data validation when you want to create a clean data set, because as you mentioned, there's a ton of different errors that can occur when collecting data and then um, moving data around, especially transcription errors. And by including data validation, that definitely helps limit the transcription errors.
thank you, Philip. So we can move on to our last presenter, which will again be done by Marianas from the University of Buffalo. She'll be presenting on data collection software and the introduction to Stata. Marianas, may you please share your screen again?
Yes. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction again. Today I'll be introducing you to a powerful data analysis called STATA. While many think that STATA is an acronym, it's actually not. It's just the name of the software, which is combining the ideas of statistics and data. Stata has become one of the most widely used programs for data management and statistical analysis, especially in public health, economic, social issues, and clinical research. What makes Stata special is it's useful to combine two ways of working: a command line interface where we put text-based instructions such as coding, and a GUI, which stands for graphical user interface. This lets you use menus and buttons instead of typing commands, allowing people who are not coding experts to be able to use this. This makes data flexible and accessible for both beginner and advanced users. The purpose and objective of Stata is primarily to help people with large data sets efficiently and accurately, and can import data from spreadsheets, surveys, and databases, clean and organize the data, analyze statistical methods, and visualize the results. And now, as we can see, I have input a data table to my right here, so you can see what a Stata table looks like and how inputting the data is can be seen. Stata also allows you to create code to do files, and a do file is a script where you can write all your steps in the Stata language, kind of like a recipe. This helps you work to have a reproducible data set, meaning that others can follow your code and what you have written, and it gives them the same results, which is very important in research for your data to be double checked. Now, what does data help in? It helps with major steps in data analysis processes, including data cleaning. This means handling like missing values, fixing data, entry errors, and removing duplicates. Data manipulation, such as combining two different data sets, filtering rows, or creating new calculation variables, or running a statistical test, such as t-tests, ANOVA tables, which can stand for analysis variance. It compares average across more than two groups, and regression analysis, which uses understanding relationship between variables like how income might predict health and outcomes, data visualizations, and scatter plots. I have put two diagrams, a T distribution table and an ANOVA table, so you can see the difference between what this data is able to help with. When can Stata be used? Stata is mostly used after data has been collected during the analysis stage, but it also plays a role in designing data collection system, specifically in surveys like clinical trials, survey research, policy evaluation, econometrics, which makes its application in statics for the economic data, and public health monitoring, like tracking diseases or outbreak, like vaccines, like we did in COVID-19. Basically, they're structured data and to make it more, and it helps you make more sense of the information that you have. Its data is most likely being used to help you see the results of different data sets. What are the findings that are possible through Stata? Stata helps researchers draw values insights from their data, such as central tendencies like mean, average, middle values, and mode, the relationship between variables, and the correlation and regression lines, and trends and patterns in hypothesis testing, which allows evidence-based conclusions with things like confidence intervals and p-values that help to show the likelihood of your results and that they are real and not just random by chance. Why Stata still matters today? Even though Stata has been around for decades, it continues to go as a professional tool because it is constantly updated with modern features and more statistical tools. It is trusted academic and research communities. There's a large support community with forums, tutorials, and official documents to help new users, and offers transparency and usability. Users can see exactly what the commands are and what they're running, which helps learning, addition, and sharing your process. In conclusion, Stata is an incredible valuable tool for anybody working with data. It simplifies complex tasks, encouraging accuracy and support reproducible research, which allows you to have the research viewed by many professionals to see if your results are valuable, which is vital to find changes in health, economics, and education. Whether students are learning statistics or professional heading into real-world data, Stata is a smart and accessible software to use as it's really easy and it helps you have a beginning and be able to analyze data correctly. Here are my references and thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mariana. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, then if not, then that will conclude our call for today. We thank everyone for joining us for a Rugby Research and Prevention Group Analytics series. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Goodbye.